But their voices were amazing as they advocated for our patients. So courageous. Any medical professional or physician who's watching or listening to this knows how potentially dangerous it is for your career to speak up publicly to defend life. And so we just were so thankful that we had so many physicians, over 1,000 across the country. Florida was our largest coalition, but over 1,000 who stood with us publicly to say that these ballot initiatives were dangerous for our patients. Welcome to Caring for Both, a curbside consult series by the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, or AAPLOG. On this podcast, we bring on experts to provide insights to support you as a medical professional in your life-affirming practice and career. I'm one of your hosts for today, Dr. Christina Francis, board-certified OBGYN and also CEO of AAPLOG.
And I'm Prudence Robertson, Director of Media Relations for AAPLOG Action. And today we're really excited to bring you not only a panel discussing the elections and kind of what happened, but also just a recap of the results of abortion ballot initiatives across the country and really discuss where we go from here as, AAPLOG Action, the advocacy arm of the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs. Also with us today are Dr. Susan Bane, OBGYN and board chair of AAPLOG Action, and Rebecca Weaver, the new director of advocacy and policy for AAPLOG and AAPLOG Action. And they each have unique insights into what happened on Tuesday night. And I'm sure we're very excited to hear their reactions and their thoughts and just really get the download from them about the next steps for us as an organization, for physicians who are our members, and for our patients, of course, both maternal and fetal patients of the doctors at AAPLOG. So I want to jump right into it. And Rebecca, start with a question for you. You recently joined AAPLOG as the Director of Advocacy and Policy. Yesterday, there were 10 states voting on abortion ballot measures. Can you recap for us what happened in those states and really just election results overall?
Yeah, definitely. So by now, I think everyone is aware that Trump won the presidency with the electoral vote and the popular vote, kind of high level, right? And then Republicans have taken back the Senate. And at this point, when we're recording, the House has not been fully determined yet, but it's looking like the Republicans will retain control of the House. And this result nationally is really the best outcome we could hope for the pro-life movement. And we'll get more into that later. But specifically, what we've been engaged in are these ballot initiatives, right? And you said there's 10 states that had these on their ballots. We were active in a handful of those states. But what we saw last night is that after 7 previous devastating losses on these ballot initiatives front, we finally had some wins. We had 3 wins last night. Those wins were in Florida, South Dakota, and Nebraska, and we'll dig into those more. But specifically, I did want to say about Nebraska, that was a confusing one because it actually had 2 ballot measures on their ballot, one for enshrining abortion into their constitution and one to prohibit abortion after the first trimester. And thankfully, the one to prohibit abortion after the first trimester is the one that was successful. And so with these other states, unfortunately, their ballot measures were successful, which for us is devastating, right? Because that means that abortion has been enshrined in their constitutions. And it means we have a lot more work to do, but I'll let us get into that later.
Sure. And Dr. Francis, how has AAPLOG Action really been involved in this election on the ground, specifically in these unprecedented victories in Florida, South Dakota, and Nebraska? I mean, I think it's important for us all to just take a moment to realize how unprecedented this moment is and how monumental it is, not just for us at AAPLOG, but the pro-life movement as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you said, Prudence, and as Rebecca referenced as well, since the Dobbs decision, it almost felt like the pro-life movement had sort of one loss after another as these ballot initiatives had been passed in various states. And last year, specifically in Ohio, I think was a really devastating loss for many of us because it happened in a state that many of us thought it would never happen. And, we at AAPLOG realized pretty quickly after the Ohio loss that the pro-abortion side in Ohio was being led by physicians, unfortunately, who were spreading wrong information. I mean, honestly, blatant lies about the care that Ohio women could receive under their heartbeat bill in Ohio, and they were saying that women could not receive life-saving care. And so that really spurred us on at AAPLOG to say, okay, we need to develop an advocacy arm, a 501c4, that would allow us to be involved in political issues like these ballot initiatives. And so we started that this year. And we helped support the development of physician coalitions in 4 different states across the country. So in Florida and South Dakota, where we saw victories, which were amazing, so exciting. And then also in Arizona and Colorado. And what we did was we trained these physicians. They already had the expertise that they needed. But we trained them to speak to media, to write op-eds, to even, go out to local community venues, whether it be a church or a school or other venues, and talk about the dangers of these ballot initiatives and about the care that the life-affirming care that they provide their patients each and every day. And so I want to, obviously we're celebrating the wins in South Dakota, which was a decisive victory. The vast majority of South Dakotans voted no on their amendment. And then in Florida as well, where we saw a really amazing victory there as they defeated their ballot initiative. But I also just would like to take this opportunity to thank our physicians in every one of those coalitions, but also especially in Arizona and Colorado, because I know those physicians are feeling a bit discouraged today after those losses. But their voices were amazing as they advocated for our patients. So courageous. Any medical professional or physician who's watching or listening to this knows how potentially dangerous it is for your career to speak up publicly to defend life. And so we just were so thankful that we had so many physicians, over 1,000 across the country. Florida was our largest coalition, but over 1,000 who stood with us publicly to say that these ballot initiatives were dangerous for our patients.
Yeah. And win or lose, I think that's such a good point, Christina, that, these physician voices are key in not just winning ballot proposals, but in changing hearts and minds and moving the culture to become more life affirming. So I think you're so right on that front. Rebecca, let's talk about the states that voted for Trump, who, we hope will promote pro-life policies as a president, but also voted to enshrine abortion in their states. What do you kind of make of that?
Yeah, it's really interesting and a bit of a conundrum. We have 4 states that 2 of which have been called for Trump, and those were Missouri and Montana. And then we have 2 that are leaning Trump. They have not been called yet as of the recording of this podcast. And those are Nevada and Arizona, where, Trump has gotten those electoral college votes, those popular votes, but the constitutional amendment enshrining abortion passed in those states. And when you look at the numbers, they're almost equal when you flip them between the votes for Trump and then the votes for these ballot measures. And that's something that our movement has to address. And I think what you were just saying, Prudence, about how physician voices are critical. And this is really the first election cycle where we have very actively had physician voices part of the conversation on the pro-life side, providing that pro-life medical voice. And I think what these conundrum states show us is that we still have a lot of work to do to change hearts and minds and to amplify pro-life physician voices, to clarify what these amendments do, that they are dangerous, that they're vague, that they're extreme. And physicians are the ones best positioned to do that because we trust them to take care of us and know how to care for us as patients. And so really those states just highlight that we still have a lot of work to do. Even as we celebrate the wins we got, we still have work to do as we move into the future on this.
Mm-hmm. And, in Florida, especially, we saw the fruits of physicians speaking out, just giving, some insight into the readout post-election. We've defeated Amendment 4. Physicians spoke in over 300 media interviews to, educate their patients, Florida voters, about what was on their ballot. And Dr. Bane, I want to turn to you and talk a little bit more in depth about that. Why is it so important in your perspective for physicians to be getting involved and making their voices heard regarding policy that affects our patients, especially regarding abortion?
Yeah, that's a great question, Prudence. I want to start by echoing what Dr. Francis said and thank my colleague, fellow physicians all across these states who really very bravely stepped out and let their trusted voices be heard. Courage is contagious, And, 76 to 93% of practicing OBGYNs do not perform induced abortions. I like to call that group the sleeping giant group. And they have to get engaged. And I think these ballot initiatives are a huge step towards a revolution where they are going to no longer be afraid to step out. And they have to get engaged because, as Rebecca said, we're one of the most trusted voices in America. Second is they have to get engaged for protection of our patients and protection of our profession. So when you think of our patients, we have two. We have a maternal and a fetal patient. And we know that in abortion, we're already going to lose the life of our fetal patient. And we want our maternal patient, if she chooses to have an abortion, while we wish she chose life, if she chooses to have an abortion, we don't want her to lose her life in that process. And, abortions are dangerous, particularly chemical abortion drugs. And then protecting our profession, we have to restore that life-affirming Hippocratic medicine that both Dr. Francis and I were trained with, and that is being lost. And if we are silent, we will lose our profession. And I think people are starting to realize that, and they're coming on board. And so I think that 76 to 93% is waking up, and we're thrilled that we're over 1,000 in our coalition, and I think that's going to keep growing.
It certainly is a moment of revolution, to your point. I think that's a really important point to make. Rebecca, talk to us a little bit about AAPLOG's national footprint and the work that you'll be doing leading into this new year as the new administration comes into office.
Yeah, so I mean, you can already see our national footprint with these wins, which is just amazing, and so grateful for that. And thinking about what the next year is going to hold, specifically, with next 4 years, but just looking ahead to 2025, what it's going to hold in this new administration, we're going to be engaged in a lot of things that are not always glamorous, but are super important at the federal level. So things like rulemaking, where the laws are passed, and we think about, everyone knows that part of how our government works, but no one really knows that next stage, which is where the laws are implemented and the rulemaking, and that's so important. So things like that, we're going to be working to affirm life-affirming policies through the executive branch and through bureaucratic actions. And so that's just a wonky way of saying things like the Food and Drug Administration. They have a huge impact on physicians, on patients, especially with things like drug-induced abortions, right? We've already seen that. So working to protect all of our patients through these other means. And then, of course, seeking to pass life-affirming legislation, however that can look at the national level, especially including pro-conscience protections legislation, strengthening those conscience protections for our medical professionals who want to practice medicine in a life-affirming way. But really, regardless of what the federal government, the federal level looks like, certainly we'll be engaged there. But our fight is at the state level right now. And we all know that with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, this issue is returned to the states. The battle is on the ground in the states. That's what we're seeing with the state ballot initiatives. And so that's really where our focus is going to continue to be, is advancing life-affirming policies at the state level, because that's where the most can be won at this point.
That's where the action is, for sure. Dr. Francis, shifting gears a bit, I want to address these stories that were released by ProPublica in the weeks leading up to Election Day. The stories of Amber Thurman, Nevaeh Crane, and others. What was your reaction to the coverage of these stories in the news and just how it was perceived by the general public?
Yeah, well, of course, I think many people are probably familiar with, it was really 4 stories that were released over the last month or so in ProPublica, talking about women who had died from either pregnancy complications or actually complications related to abortion drugs. The 2 women from Georgia, Amber Thurman and Candy Miller. And if anyone listening or watching this is not aware of those, AAPLOG actually did a lot of social media posts and videos about that. So I'd encourage you to go back to find out more details of their cases. But long story short, these were tragic cases of young women who died needlessly because they did not receive appropriate medical care. And yet those who are advocating for unopposed abortion, for radical abortion policies and agendas, are using their deaths, really, they're being used as pawns to say that pro-life laws prevented them from getting the care that they needed. When in fact, it's pretty obvious, at least from the public information that we have available to any physician worth their salt. I think Dr. Bane and I pored over these stories when they came out, trying to glean what we could from them. And I think it was just really obvious that these were cases oftentimes of medical malpractice, that these women should have received immediate care for the complications that they were presenting with, and that the laws in their states in no way prevented their physicians from giving them that care. I think the case of Nevaeh Crane, for any physician who's listening to this, to me, that one was one of the most egregious, biggest stretches, I suppose, that they were trying to blame on Texas law. She had a viable pregnancy. She was 6 months along, per their reports, and presented to hospitals that had the capability of taking care of a baby from 23 weeks gestation and beyond. And she was suffering from a horrible infection. It sounds like probably urosepsis. And not only did they neglect her care, they neglected the care of her baby until she presented with a dead baby, and she was near death, and then in fact ended up dying, a young 18-year-old girl. And it had nothing to do with the Texas law, and yet it's being, her death and these others are being blamed on pro-life laws and used to try and scare people into voting for these radical pro-abortion ballot initiatives, or for trying to overturn pro-life laws that exist in the states. I think it really is a travesty, and I think that not only does the general public deserve to understand the truth, which is that pro-life laws allow for physicians like Dr. Bane and I to intervene immediately when women are facing these kinds of complications, but also physicians need to know that. They need to understand that. And AAPLOG is really, I would say, one of, if not the only, medical organization that is stepping up and providing accurate information and education to physicians. ACOG, the American College of OBGYNs, and other organizations that should be providing that guidance, regardless of their feelings about induced abortion, are not doing it. In fact, they're contributing to the confusion. And so AAPLOG is stepping into that gap. We're providing accurate information. And when this podcast airs, it should be just the following week, we will be releasing a medical education video that is excellent and features a maternal fetal medicine specialist along with an attorney who will be explaining these state laws and explaining how and why physicians can intervene immediately so that we ensure that our patients get the best care possible.
Really well said. And Dr. Bane, I know you've been speaking out on social media in response to these stories quite a bit. So I want to give you the opportunity, anything to add about these stories? What has your message been to physicians on this?
Yeah, I don't get my feathers ruffled easily, but these stories ruffled my feathers. And they ruffled them because it's really sad that these 4 women actually, and Dr. Francis has brought up the case in Nevada of Alana Dixon in the past, who also died about the same time, but we didn't hear her story because there was no law to blame for her story. She was in Nevada and could have had abortion up to viability, which is around 24 weeks. But I'm in addition to being sad, I'm really mad, and I'm mad at the reporting, because while they accurately say that the deaths are preventable, they blame them on the laws. And as Dr. Francis just explained, the laws aren't the problem. The implementation of the laws, the understanding. And I've really been challenging my colleagues across the country. There's nothing new in how we take care of women in medical emergencies. There in Texas, there was nothing new after the Dobbs opinion. They have been under the provision in their Texas Heartbeat Act. Nothing changed. They've been practicing that way for years. Same in Georgia. And we're a highly regulated industry. And we have to always learn and stay up to date, whether it's HIPAA laws, when the Affordable Care Act came, and so stop using that excuse is what I'm saying, is take care of your patients and don't blame the laws. And when you look at what these women or their families are saying, like that they were told, they are being told by the doctors that I can't treat you until you're sicker, or I can't treat you till your baby's heartbeat is gone. And that's just not true. And so I'm pushing back on my colleagues who aren't putting their patients first.
Yeah, yeah. And that's really powerful. Rebecca, eh, doctors, thank you so much for speaking into those stories. I think it's really important that your voices are heard on them. Rebecca, shifting gears back to talking a little bit more about APLOG Action's policy priorities. I know you spoke to this a bit already, but explain a bit more about what those top priorities are going into 2025, especially with what we hope will be, an administration that's more friendly to life-affirming physicians and women who need care.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things throughout this that has just been highlighted is like there are a lot of groups, pro-life groups, even pro-life groups that have physicians and medical professionals who are speaking out on these things, and we just want to continue taking the lead on highlighting the pro-life medical voice and having physician voices heard on stories like these. That's something else we're going to continue to be active on. As far as policy goes, hopefully we will have no more ballot initiatives next year, but if there are, we will be active in that. We will be active to stop more of these ballot initiatives that are trying to enshrine abortion into state constitutions and dangerous for both of the patients that our physicians serve. Also passing strong conscience protections. This is a hugely important piece of legislation that we're going to be working on at the state level and federal level. And then just broad brushstroke, advocating for policies that acknowledge the dignity of all human life, that promote health and flourishing for moms and their children, that allow life affirming medicine to continue in our country, and in that equipping medical voices to speak out in favor of those good bills and stop those bad bills, and then equipping those decision makers, those policy makers, our elected officials with what they need as far as research, talking points, bills, etc., to support our physicians' ability to practice life affirming care.
All really great stuff. Very important things to be fighting for. Dr. Francis, what's your message to your fellow physicians coming off of this election week? It's, been a busy, crazy week for so many of us tracking all of these results. But I want to hear from you about how you think the outcome will impact the way that you care for your patients, your practice of medicine, and all that that entails.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the first thing that I would say is hopefully uh, this week and the weeks leading up to it, if you saw our physician coalition speaking out, hopefully that helped people across the country to realize that they are not alone. I know so many pro-life physicians and other medical professionals really feel like they're alone in that. So, one, I would say you are not alone. In fact, you, as Susan said, I think we are you're kind of the sleeping giant. You're actually part of the silent majority, but we understand why so many physicians feel like they need to be silent. So I'm hoping that the courage of those physicians who spoke up will be contagious, as Dr. Bane said, that physicians will take heart. I also think, the path that we want to help put forward, and other medical organizations that we work alongside are doing the same thing, but is a path that says there is a better way to take care of our patients. And that is through life affirming medicine that not only avoids induced abortion, which we know is not healthcare and is harmful for our patients, but also helps them achieve better outcomes in their health, in their life, helps them flourish, helps them to be able to have the life that they want to have. And so we really want to paint this picture of a better way of taking care of our patients, restoring that joy and that purpose to the reason that we went into this profession, which is so often lost, I think. So that's what I would want our physicians to hear. Also, for those physicians who are practicing in these states that now have induced abortion really in practicality enshrined in their constitution essentially through the entire duration of pregnancy. I want to say, take heart, first of all. Know that we are not going to give up on defending your right to practice the kind of medicine that you know to be best for your patients in your state. That's what Rebecca was referencing, those conscience protections. That is going to be one of our very top priorities, especially in states like Colorado and Arizona and New York and so many others that have lost these battles. We will continue to help be your voice. We do ask you to come alongside of us in whatever way you can, and know that this is the moment, I think, in our profession where we need to be speaking up, not only for our patients, but also for our profession. We need to be speaking up for those that are going to come behind us. We need to leave them a profession that is worth joining, honestly. And so this is the time that we really need to do that. We are in the battle of our life, literally the battle for life right now. And it is a bit of a tumultuous time, certainly post Dobbs. But I also think that we have great inroads to make, and we really are showing, we talk a lot about the trust between a patient and their physician. And that is an inviolable trust that I know those of us who are physicians do not take lightly. It is a great responsibility that we have. I see, though, this role that we're playing more in the public sphere is a continuation of that trust, because the public are our patients. They put their trust in us, and it is our responsibility then to fight for them, but also to give them good and accurate information.
Yes. Yes. And we still have just a little bit of time here. So, our conversation has just kind of sparked this question for me, and maybe we could just hear briefly from both Dr. Francis and Dr. Bane about this. We have seen 7 devastating losses in years leading up to this. And again, this is such a huge moment for our movement, a moment that I think some of us were unsure that we would see. When Roe was overturned and we started seeing loss after loss, even in pro-life stronghold states like Kansas and Ohio, that really came as such a shock for all of us. And I think what this election cycle has shown is that when physicians speak out, electoral victories can be achieved. And so I'd just love to kind of hear both of your thoughts about that, and really just how you thought our physicians made a difference and really brought these over the finish line to produce wins for women, amazing wins for women this year.
Yeah, I'll start, and then Dr. Francis. For me, when I look back on the anatomy of a loss in Ohio and why we lost, the other side had those physician voices out there, and we didn't have them till late in the game, and we had a whole lot less of them. And when you look at exit polling, especially among people of faith, what we saw is that about 30% who believe life begins at conception actually voted to enshrine abortion in their constitution. Over 50% of Catholics voted that. About 25%, I believe it was, of evangelicals voted that. And then about 30% of people who go to church more than once a week voted for it. And these people did not vote for it because they believe in second and third trimester abortion. They voted scared, and they fell for the lies that were being told them. They were scared for themselves, for their sisters, for their daughters, for their wives, for their girlfriends, that they could not get that emergency care that I think, AAPLOG is going to continue to shout to the mountaintops until we don't have to anymore, about the fact that there's not a single law that prevents us from taking care of women who have miscarriage, ectopic, medical emergencies, situations where there may be damage to their permanent damage to organs. And so I think, we learned a lot from Ohio, and Florida in particular was a great example and model of how to move forward. And Dr. Francis, I think you can speak to that really well because you were involved at that level. But that's kind of how I think about what we learned and where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was going to kind of echo what you had said in that I agree that I think a lot of people in the past, and even this year too, I think voted for these constitutional amendments out of fear that their mother, their daughter, their wife, their sister wouldn't be able to receive life-saving care, miscarriage treatment, ectopic pregnancy treatment if they didn't vote yes for these. And in fact, what they ended up doing was enshrining a radical abortion agenda that will allow for risky later in pregnancy abortions the removal of basic health and safety regulations. Many of these states were already seeing it in Michigan. Michigan passed one of these ballot initiatives a couple of years ago, and now essentially all of their health and safety regulations for abortion facilities have been removed, meaning unlicensed facilities can practice and honestly butcher women without any repercussions. And so this is what is being ushered in out of fear. And so I think it is so important, and we saw this, as you said, Susan, in the states where we had physician coalitions, physicians being able to say, like I can say, my home state is Indiana. I practice in Indiana. Our law went into effect in 2022. Since then, I've treated multiple ectopic pregnancies. I've treated multiple miscarriages. I've induced labor when I needed to, even when the woman was early in pregnancy, if she was facing a pregnancy complication. I'm obviously not in jail. I still have a license to practice medicine. We can do this in every state. And so it's so important for physicians to be out there saying that, because then it's not just conjecture by somebody who's a politician or whatever. So, my last encouragement, I think, to physicians would be, if you're practicing in a state that has one of these pro-life laws and you've been treating pregnancy complications, you've been treating ectopics, you've been treating miscarriages, use your voice to say that so that people know that we can continue to do that. And the other thing that I would say is honestly calling out my fellow physicians. It is time that you do the research on your own. It is time that you read the laws. I posted something on Twitter yesterday because I was so frustrated from seeing multiple posts about people saying, in states like Texas, you can't treat ectopic pregnancy. I posted the actual text of the bill and highlighted it where it says specifically, it is not an abortion if you're treating an ectopic pregnancy. So it is in plain language. It's easy for physicians to understand. If you are practicing in a state where this law has been passed, read your bill, talk to an attorney if you have questions, and know it is time for us to put our patients' lives and the care of our patients ahead of this misinformation, these political agendas that we're hearing, or fear that you might have. If you have fear or uncertainty as a physician, go get educated, and we are helping do that. And so that's just my last exhortation, I guess, to people, is there is no reason for physicians not to know this at this point. And so really seek out the resources. I'm getting all fired up now. I'm getting on my soapbox, but as Dr. Bane said, our hearts are breaking that women have lost their lives because they didn't receive the care that they needed. That is something that should unite all of us. No matter where you stand on the issue of induced abortion, we should all want women to receive this care.
And I just want to say with what Dr. Francis was sharing, on the AAPLOG website, we have all kinds of resources to help you if you don't understand what your state law says. If you have a certain question or concern, we probably have a resource on there, and those are there for you, for physicians to access, or for the public too, if you just want to know some more information. So you should check out our website to see some of that evidence-based research that we are engaged in, because we want to address all this confusion that's going across our country and is needless right now.
Yeah, and it's AAPLOG.org. That's the place to go. And I think the other thing that's on there that's important to remind everybody is that we sent an open letter to ACOG after the release in September of the 2 Georgia deaths, calling for collaboration and education of our profession to understand these laws. And then we recently joined other organizations for a women's healthcare declaration that also called for clarity here and to remove the misinformation, disinformation that's out there. So AAPLOG is leading the way. So as we wrap this up, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank all our listeners. And we hope this was helpful for you. And if you like this episode, be sure to give us a like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Or if you're listening on a podcast app, go ahead and give us a 5-star review. Before we go, we also want to give a shout out of appreciation to our donors. Thank you for standing with us in this fight and equipping our team with the critical resources required to continue this work. If you have not given yet in 2024, we would greatly appreciate if you'd consider doing so. And for more information on ways to give, just visit our website again at AAPLOG.org. So, as we talk about often on this podcast, it is no exaggeration to say that we are currently in a defining moment in medicine, and every gift makes a difference. So, thank you for being here today, and we'll see you on our next episode.